Hi everyone, my name's John. Welcome back to my channel. It seems like a pretty popular thing to do here on BookTube is to look back on the past year and talk about some of the favorite books that you've read. Now, I've only read 24 books in 2024, 24 in 2024, and totally unintentional, by the way. So I figured a top 10 list is probably a little silly, since I would be telling you about almost half of the books that I read. So in lieu of a top 10 list, let's do a top 5, or if you prefer, a top 3. And you'll know which are my top 3 because I'm going to do them in ascending order, starting with number 5. So let me just jump straight into things with number 5. And it is The Plantagenets by Dan Jones. This is opens up with the White Ship, which of course has sees the death of William Atheling, the oldest son of Henry I, who is going to become king, but he dies when he's a teenager with many other people, and it's a blow to the royal family, to say the least. But it opens up with that, and then goes all the way through Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine and her 2 sons who become King of England, Richard I, who fights Saladin during the Third Crusade, and King John, who signs the Magna Carta, all the way down through Edward III, whose son, Edward the Black Prince, dies before he can become a king himself, which splits the Plantagenet line into 2 lines. So you no longer have one bloodline, you have 2 cadet lines, is what they're called, and they are the Yorks and the Lancasters, of course, and that sets us up for the War of the Roses. So this Dan Jones's version stops in 1399 with the death of Richard II, who is the last English king who can trace his bloodline directly back to William the Conqueror. But of course, most people say that Plantagenets go all the way up until Richard III, but he stops it at Richard II for the purposes of what I just said. But this was really good, really sort of, you get 280 years worth of history in 500 pages, told with the flair of a novelist, only like you can only get with Dan Jones. Really good, really enjoyed it. This is great, but maybe for other reasons. This is Timothy Schneider's Bloodlands, Europe between Hitler and Stalin. I read this with Vin from Revenant Reads. Actually, we read it in December of 2023. But I marked it as finished in January of 2024. That's when I consider that I've actually read something by the finish date. I mark all of my books with a completed on, and you can see I completed that on January the 4th. So that's when I counted it. This is about the space between Berlin and Moscow, sort of between the Baltic Sea to the north, the Black Sea to the south. So it includes land like eastern Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states. And these are what Schneider calls the Bloodlands. And between 1933 and 1945, maybe as many as 14 million people were killed in that period of time. Being basically dual occupied by Hitler from the west and Stalin from the east. So possibly the worst part of Europe to have been in during World War II and a little bit before. But it talks about it's a little bit of everything, but it's a lot. It's very heavy on how people were deployed to exterminate other people. And it's a lot of numbers. It's a lot of big numbers of mass graves and harrowing, horrible things. But it was history I didn't really know too much about, and it's not something you want to read before bedtime. But it's still great, and I think everyone owes it to themselves to read this. It's truly a spectacular book. That's number 4. These are all so good, really, that I had a hard time ranking them 5 to 1, but I did a provisional. Here's number 3. This is The Enlightenment, The Pursuit of Happiness, 1680 to 1790 by Richie Robertson. I read this in a group that I know from the Historathon Discord. And this is a little bit different from your average Enlightenment book. You get everything that you would regularly expect to get in your average Enlightenment book. The rise of the scientific method, the sort of growing place of reason in society, math, science, all of that stuff, logic. But then what makes this book interesting is what's in the subtitle there, The Pursuit of Happiness, which sort of hints at what the minor emphasis of this book is, which is not the scientific, the rational, the logical. It is the humane and the humanistic. So things like punishment reform in prisons, to where people started to be treated more like people instead of animals. The rise of the novel that was aimed at a mass readership to elevate the senses and the morals of the people who read the books. Aesthetics as an art criticism as a type of art in and of itself. All of these things, it's more humanities centered, and how the Enlightenment was more humanistic than we may have ever really thought of before. It's that angle, and like I said, you get all the other stuff too, the science and all of that. That's maybe the first quarter of the book, but the middle of this book really emphasizes those more humanistic elements, and that's what I really liked about it. It's that part that made this really worth it. It is a bit of a time investment, but because of that emphasis, I really enjoyed it. Next up is a biography of 1st century BC Rome's most cantankerous gas bag, Cicero. I have a fondness for Cicero because I see a little bit of myself in him. I am not an attorney, have no ambitions to be one, but he was probably the most famous attorney of his time. Came from relatively modest means, came up in Rome, had a good deal to do with the putting down of the Catiline conspiracy, ended up getting in trouble during the rise of Caesar, and not too long after Julius Caesar is assassinated, he himself finds himself getting assassinated also at the hands of one of Mark Antony's henchmen. He has run afoul of Mark Antony too, and that's what finally does him in. But he is such an interesting person, and Anthony Everett really goes out of his way, despite everything that Cicero does to take up all the room in the air. He really finds a lot of likable things about him. And one of the things I like about Cicero is when he wanted to be, he could be a really good philosopher. he very often was not, and I mentioned that in the full review of this book. I have a full review of all of these books on my channel already. I'll try to link them below if I remember. But I wrote my dissertation for one of my philosophy seminars on Cicero's Tusculan Disputations, which I still have really fond memories of writing and reading. So it was fun to live with while I read this book. And last but not least, number one, my favorite book of 2024, which I was not expecting to be a favorite book at all. I was expecting to just, read this, get it under my belt. It is from Princeton University Press. You can see right there, Princeton. This is a biography of Michelangelo, but with a special bent, the special emphasis. It is by William E. Wallace, and it's Michelangelo, God's Architect. See, the story of his final years and greatest masterpiece. And you can tell what the greatest masterpiece is right there. It is St. Peter's. And this tells the story of Michelangelo starting when he was about 70 years old, which would have been in 1546, give or take. And the last 18 or 19 years of his life until he dies in 1564. And he's 70 years old in the middle of the 16th century in Italy. He's well lived out the length of the average person's lifetime. The Pope asks him, he has a lifetime's worth of art behind him. There's this project I've really wanted to do. It's been on the fritz for half a century. No one's been able to really get it going. Can you come and be the lead architect on this project? And despite being 70 years old and maybe not in the greatest health, he does it. And it's about the last 18 to 19 years of his life, and maybe his greatest architectural achievement, St. Peter's Cathedral. And he didn't have to do it. The Pope, I'm sure, would have understood had he just passed because of his age, said let someone else younger do it. But he took it up. And he spent the last 18 years of his life working on it diligently, corresponding with friends, family members, fellow workers, being the studious, diligent task manager that he was. And it's told through his diary entries, his letters, and just the day-to-day life he lived working on St. Peter's. And it is beautiful and poignant and touching and fascinating. And I would have expected it to be fascinating, but I wasn't expecting the beautiful and the poignant and the touching. But it was all of those things. And easily my favorite book of last year, Michelangelo, God's Architect, by William E. Wallace. My favorite book. So I'll try to link all of these in the notes down below, so you can see if you're interested in a more fully fleshed out review, 8, 10, 12 minutes. Those will be available. And I will see you next time. Bye.